All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be able to connect both of the Chinook Winds region and the Pacific Mountain region together in this learning and conversation time in regards to trustees and all things that will come with that. Um, Joel and Sue and Barry are here to help us from Chinook Wind. So the property working group is going to help us out. And Joel's the Chinook Wind's regional property and financial strategy advisor. So with their help, I want to get us started with a bit of a land acknowledgement and a short little prayer to get us started. And then I'll hand it over to Joel and he'll take it away. We acknowledge that the Pacific Mountain region and Chinook Winds Regional Council communities of faith, buildings, and ministries are situated on the traditional, ancestral, and treaty territories across BC, Yukon, and southern Alberta. We honor that the history and the culture, and we also acknowledge the hardships that were endured then and now. We give thanks for those who have been stewards of the land. I'm going to mute you all just so that we are quiet. And when and if you have something to say, I encourage you just to wait till the end for questions and then raise your hand and we'll get to you. I'll monitor as best as I can. So if we all take just a deep breath and wait into the moment and hope that we can be present for today. Gracious and loving God, be with us today as we hear and learn something that may be a refresher or may be absolutely brand new to us. Help us to understand and grow and continue to be the people you have led us to be. With those who are going to share their knowledge, be with them and help them present what they would like to get to us today. In your name, amen. Just a second, Gary.
There we go. Okay, I believe I am unmuted.
You are.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for
Joel, just a second. Gary.
Clarification, I'm here as a trustee.
Yep.
I'm not part of the resource team.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you. Yep.
Okay, so thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. It's quite astounding to see the response that we've had from both regions. As Shauna said, my name is Joel Den Haan. Many of you I will have met, and some of you will have heard this presentation before, but it never hurts to chew your cabbage twice. I am Property and Finance Advisory Consultant for Chinook Winds Region, and I am the Coordinating Consultant to the Property and New Church Development Council here in Chinook Winds Region, actually across Alberta. So I spent a lot of time dealing with property and finance, and it's out of that basis that it's always important to come back to our trustees and to our governing bodies and kind of help refresh, what we're all about. I simply, from the point of view of housekeeping, there's a lot of you on screen here today. I'm getting messages already coming in on my text message that the Zoom room is now full. Is at capacity? I don't know what that means. So thanks for your enthusiasm, and let's hope we can make this interesting for you. I also, because we have a large group here, it's going to be difficult for me to monitor or respond to questions as we go along. So we've got Shauna monitoring the chat room. Questions can go in the chat room. And then at appropriate points in the presentation, we will stop and just check any questions that people might have. And then there'll be some time for questions, generally speaking, at the end of the presentation. But I will not be able to take your questions sort of randomly going throughout, because frankly, I can't see all of you. And so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. And some of you will have seen some of these slides, and most of you will be familiar with some of the themes here. So it's more at a point to kind of help us refresh our awareness and move ahead in that way. So just want to confirm that I have the screen being shared. And yeah, so today in the workshop, we're going to spend some time talking about, generally speaking, the role of trustees in a community of faith, and the role relative to, for lack of a better phrase, the law. We're going to talk about the trust model deed of the United Church of Canada, which is a particular and unique animal that we get to work with. We'll talk a bit about insurance, and at that point, I anticipate getting some guidance from Sue Broderick, who is our property working group chair here in Chinook Winds Region, and Barry Clayton, who's a member of our Region Council Executive, as well as on the property working group. Both of them have significant experience with insurance. We're going to spend a bit of time with land titles issues, which is a vastly more interesting topic for those of us who are on this side of the rocks than it is for people in Pacific Mountain region. But we do want to just kind of touch on some principles around that. We're going to spend some time talking about risk aversion versus prudent and faithful investment, and how that is reflected in our trustee policies. I'm also going to introduce some conversation today around rentals, leases, revenue, and taxation, because this is an increasing factor that I see coming across my desk in many communities of faith. And then at the end, we'll deal with some process on property transactions and how the manual advises us. The intention of this seminar today is, this is like your quick setup guide when you get a new computer or a new TV or a new stereo system. This is not, if you want the detailed instructions, there's a trustee handbook that is available, and I'll be able to refer to that as we go forward. The trustee handbook is available online at the General Council website. You know, there's your detailed I suppose, guide to operations. The other thing, of course, is to pay attention to the manual of the United Church of Canada, and everything that we're talking about today is going to be encapsulated in the manual under section G3. And G3 speaks to the role of trustees in a community of faith. And so if you want sort of the operating system, it's in the manual there in section G3. And in terms of detailed instructions, the trustee handbook is your go-to on that. Today is an overview designed to sort of orientate and help us get to grips with what we're doing as trustees in our communities of faith. So let's begin. The role of trustees. Okay, so these are all items that are encapsulated in the manual in section G3. Trustees hold all congregational property in trust for the local community of faith as a part of the United Church of Canada. It's really important to be clear that your trusteeship is based in the community of faith's status within the United Church of Canada. You're not trustees of a local congregation per se. As trustees, we're trustees for that local congregation, but within the United Church, which means that there's that wider umbrella, that overarching sort of policy environment that needs to be part of our mindset as we manage the affairs of the local congregation from trusteeship. The community of faith is the beneficial owner of the assets until it ceases to exist. Now, that's a technical term. The beneficial owner is the group or individuals who derive the benefit of the property. And in that sort of technical sense, the congregation or the local community of faith is a beneficial owner rather than actually a registered owner. And again, that really matters when we're dealing with anything with regard to real estate or legal professions, because they need to be working with the trustees and not with other bodies of the congregation who actually are the beneficiaries, but not the actual owners of the asset. So trustees are really the people that actually hold the property. And because we're holding that property in for the benefit of the community of faith as part of the United Church, trustees are required to follow the directions of the region as encapsulated in the manual, as encapsulated in region policies as they may evolve from time to time, and as the trustee handbook outlines them. We have to follow those policies as trustees because we're holding the assets for the benefit of a community of faith within the United Church. And so the region is the group that kind of looks after making sure that those policies are followed. Just a second here. There we go. Yes, every community of faith needs to have trustees, even if you do not own land or buildings, if there are investments, legacies, endowments, plus insurance issues, which we'll come back to. Trustees are the registrants who hold those assets. So even if you don't own a building, you still need trustees. Community of faith, each community of faith within a multi-point pastoral charge must have a set of trustees. There can be the same trustees for each community of faith within a multi-point relationship, but each one needs, each congregation needs its set of trustees. Also, if the pastoral charge holds property, because pastoral charges, just like regions, are not legal entities from the point of view of property ownership in Canada, trustees need to be nominated if a pastoral charge owns assets that belong to the collective pastoral charge that are separate from those that are held by the individual congregations. We have this sometimes when pastoral charges own manses. Typically, the pastoral charge needs trustees for the manse that aren't attached to any particular congregation or preaching point within that multi-point relationship. Another interesting aspect of trusteeship, and I can go on and on and on until tears fall out of your eyes about how this is so important. The trustee board is the only board in the United Church of Canada that can actually have official voting members who are not members of the United Church. There's a whole reason for that that's historical in nature. It's most interesting. At some point, I might tell you about it. But the majority of trustees should be full members of the United Church of Canada, but the balance of your board of trustees can be adherents or other participants from the community. So we have had situations where trustees are actually members of another congregation, but who happen to be representative on that board of trustees, either at the direction of what used to be the presbytery or for some other circumstance. But the trustee board is not, you do not have to be a member of the United Church of Canada to be a trustee. However, the majority of the trustees should be members. Okay? It's interesting because I have this in my area of work all the time. Many communities of faith have a very minimal number of trustees. The manual requires a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 15. If your trustee board starts to get too large, it becomes extremely difficult both to keep quorum and to be able to make decisions, just like if your congregational council becomes too large. But a minimum of 3 trustees are required for a bunch of reasons, including if one happens to be unavailable, you need to be able to do something to break a tie in the case of a vote. And that's why we have a minimum number of 3 on the trustee board. Another thing to be aware of is that the trustees who are on your board of trustees must be alive, because deceased trustees have a hard time voting. And so one of the things that I noted in the trustee handbook as I reviewed it today is that oftentimes folks expect that the trustees will be out of date, so to speak, in terms of who's active and who's not. Here in Chinook Winds region in the province of Alberta, we really do have to have active, living, breathing, voting trustees in order to do anything with our property or buildings. So it really is important that we have that minimum number of 3 and that we not go above that number of 15 from the point of view of managing quorum. Trustees are elected by the community of faith itself, and it's really, really important to recognize this. I run into situations fairly regularly where we have boards or councils naming trustees. Trustees are trustees for the congregation. They are not trustees for the board. Therefore, the congregation needs to nominate the trustees at a regular congregational meeting, because the trustees hold the property for the benefit of the congregation, not for the benefit of the board or council. So it's really important that a congregational meeting must be held to elect the trustees and to change trustee membership. And it's a typical majority vote, 50% plus 1 is the standard. In other words, no, it doesn't require a 2/3 vote to change your board of trustees or anything like that. The board of trustees are a part of the governance structure of the community of faith. Typically, on most church councils or boards, there will be a trustee representative named to be in the mix. And another piece to be aware of is that the ordered personnel or ministry leader in the congregation who's duly called, settled, or appointed is actually automatically a trustee and can convene the board of trustee meetings. So the minister, for lack of a better phrase, is automatically a trustee. But here in Alberta, it is not recommended that the minister be one of the trustees who's on title. As a matter of fact, that can create significant legal issues down the road. So the minister is ex officio a member of the trustees and can convene the meetings of the board of trustees. What do trustees actually have to do? Well, fundamentally, in the big picture, trustees are responsible for the care and the use of the congregational property, whether it be real property in the terms of the buildings and land, or in terms of long-running assets and endowments. So the trustees are ultimately responsible for the care and the use of that property, making sure that it is used for purposes that are allowed under United Church property and asset rules. What does that mean? It means that the trustees are in charge of making sure that the buildings, land, and capital, I guess, of the congregation are used in a way that's aligned with the charitable purposes of the United Church of Canada. We cannot, without special authorization, deploy the resources of the congregation for a purpose that is not part of the charitable mandate of a church, of the United Church of Canada. So what does that mean? It means if we decide we want to start a private school, that requires special approvals, and the trustees simply can't say, here, we're going to put our money into a private school operating account. Not that that's going to happen, but these are the types of things that we have to be aware of, that it's the United Church charitable remit that governs how our assets are deployed. Also, the trustees are responsible for insurance in the community of faith, to make sure that the policies are up to date, to make sure that adequate valuations of property are in place, and we'll come back to that, and to make sure that when claims are made, that the trustees are managing the communication around any claims under insurance. It's also recommended, and I have to say that in my experience, this would be more honored in the breach than the observance. Trustees are recommended to develop a capital maintenance plan. for the community of faith with appropriate financial arrangements. That would often consist of some form of capital reserve, but it might also include some understanding of the larger maintenance items in a church facility, things like roofs, heating systems, electrical systems. The trustees are well recommended to have a plan or an understanding of how these assets are maintained, because as part of that sort of what's called a fiduciary role, where we have to take care of the property in a way that reflects the purposes of the community of faith. Okay, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to briefly stop the screen share, and I'm going to check in with Shauna here regarding questions in the chat room, and see if we can actually just take a moment to address any of these questions at this point.
Nothing yet per the presentation, Joel. There's just been some housekeeping
technical things. Okay, yeah, absolutely. No problem. I'm glad it's...
hold on.
Oh, here's a question.
Should trustees carry liability insurance?
So, to be clear, the community of faith should carry directors and officers liability insurance for all directors and officers who are part of your governance. Typically, if you're insured through the United Church of Canada's hub plan, directors and officers liability is included in that as part of your policy, and the trustees are considered part of that policy coverage. Sue, do you want to offer any comments on that? Sue Broderick.
So directors and officers liability for communities of faith are now included in the assessment, because too many communities of faith did not have directors and officers liability. So if you're a community of faith and get an assessment from the National Church, you have directors and officers insurance. If you're a not a community of faith, but a corporate ministry or whatnot, you need to carry your own.
Does that include shared ministries, Sue?
Shared ministries, well, if they're the pastoral charge, like a pastoral charge
of the United Church.
Yeah, but that's the one thing that too many weren't carrying it, and so that happened before Eric Matheson retired. That directors and officers insurance is part of your assessment, so they make sure all the communities of faith have directors and officers insurance. So that's not part of the insurance policy anymore.
Thank you, Sue. It's always good to have representatives of our working group here, because as I mentioned earlier, Sue and Barry typically know more about these things on insurance than I do. So really good to have that information.
Couple more questions, Joel, if you want.
Yeah, I see there's a few more questions here. In terms of, I can just read the ones I'm in the chat here now, Shauna.
Okay.
Is it appropriate for the minister to vote in a trustee meeting? Yes. I'm going to say, though, as ex officio, I don't recommend that ex officio officers vote as a matter of practice, but it is allowed under United Church of Canada governance. So is that a nice weasel word bureaucrat's answer for you today? The minister can vote, that is allowed, but I personally don't necessarily recommend it, okay? A question here from Janet Zatka. Hi, Janet. The majority of trustees must be members of the community of faith. What percent constitutes a majority? My understanding is 50% plus one. So that's a really interesting thing. Now, the trustee handbook may give you more detail on how that gets constituted, but that's my understanding. Can trustees hold other board positions? Absolutely. But they need to be clear when they're on the council, which hat they're wearing. Although I know, as well as you do, that in many of our communities of faith, everybody wears about 9 different hats. So we just have to be really clear about which hat we're wearing when we're exercising leadership in any particular situation. Can the trustees be reappointed or reelected? How long for one term is ideal? So terms of office for governing body members are something that is part of local congregational practice. Trustees can be renominated under a terms of office model. And I'm also aware that a good number of trustees out there are pretty much nominated for the duration. So if you have terms of office, trustees would typically fall under the same terms of office as other members of the governing body, and they can be renominated. My sense of it is, typically, when I was advising congregations on these things, I suggested that the term of office should be a rotating term of not less than 2 years. But typically 3 years is better, because the first year you're just figuring out what the heck you're doing. And then you get to do it, and you want to be able to get some continuity. So yeah, so that's the term of office. Does that mean communities of faith do not need to carry their officers and directors insurance? I'm going to refer that back to Sue. If you already have a D&O policy.
So if you already have a D&O policy, I would recommend that you, the individual community of faith, reach out to the national office and talk to somebody in finance there and just confirm that D&O is covered. I know it is, but I think that would give your trustees comfort to confirm and to what the amount of liability. D&O is usually a pretty decent amount, and it just is to protect all of the directors and officers of your community of faith. And then maybe some of you are double carrying more than required. It didn't used to be paid for by the national and in the assessments, but it has been, at least for the last 3 or 4 years for sure. But it wouldn't hurt to reach out to the national office and ask if it is still, and I'm pretty sure it is, included in your assessment, as other things are, which is why you get an assessment from the national church.
Thank you. Okay, there is a follow-up here. Yeah, the assessment covering director and officer liabilities officially sent out to the trustees and treasurer to ensure that everyone knows. We can follow that up through the network, so to speak. D&O, directors and officers liability, D&O.
Joel, I'm going to interrupt. I found it on the national website. I'll post it in the chat.
Perfect. A couple more questions, and I'd like to move on to the exciting topic of the model trust deed. Are you all waiting with restless excitement? I see a question from Sycamoose here regarding your title and whether the trustees are alive on it or not. Actually, I'm going to hold that question. I'm going to come back to that a little later, because actually it may be different for folks in Pacific Mountain than it is for us here in Alberta, and I'll come back to that. Can the trustees hold a meeting without the minister? You can meet as much as you like, but you can't make any decisions. And that's the same as any congregational governing body. If the minister's not present, there's no legal decisions are possible. You're free to meet and talk about things, and you know, there's lots to talk about, but no decisions can be made without the minister being available as representative as acting presbyter from the region. There's a lovely old-fashioned term. And yes, Lois Punton, hi Lois from South Alberta Japanese. Absolutely, really good practice to always renominate your trustees at every congregational annual meeting, because that way you can make sure they're up to date. If one of them happens to have gone to glory in the exceeding year, you're welcome then to be able to straighten that up. and keeps everything current. So that's a really good kind of housekeeping practice. So these are good questions. I really appreciate your engagement with this material. And what we'll do now is we're going to return to our show and talk about the model trust deed. So let me get back to screen sharing here. Bring it up. Okay, here we are, the model trust deed. Okay, all community of faith property in the United Church of Canada is held according to a special legal instrument called the model trust deed. It's a specialized form of trusteeship that is unique under the United Church of Canada Act. It is not, and so let me just dwell on that for a moment. In terms of the model trust deed, what this means is that in Alberta, there's something called the Religious Societies Land Act, where property is held for certain communities of faith or certain churches, essentially as a private corporation under the Religious Societies Land Act. This does not apply to the United Church of Canada. Okay, the United Church of Canada Act applies to all land ownership and all property ownership in the United Church of Canada. And the model trust deed is the instrument that our forebears created to hold these assets under the United Church of Canada Act. When one goes to a lawyer or to land titles or any other organization and they ask to see your articles of incorporation under the Societies Act or the Religious Societies Land Act or the equivalent there under the BC parameters, you can say to them very politely and kindly, no, 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 sir or ma'am, those things don't apply. We are governed under the United Church of Canada Act, and you might be able to teach somebody about the United Church of Canada in that way. So it's an evangelistic opportunity for you. To be clear, trusteeship under the model trust deed and indeed under the United Church of Canada Act is not the same trusteeship as any other provincial trustee legislation. Okay, it is not the same. There are different standards, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But we cannot confuse the two. So if you're used to being a trustee for some other body, the local curling club, or you know, a library or some kind of public institution in your community, none of that applies to your trusteeship under the United Church of Canada Act. It will sound similar, but legally it's very, very different. So we need to kind of be aware of that. That's a gift of being set up as a national denomination before a lot of the charitable provincial legislation was actually established in many places in Canada, certainly in Alberta, Saskatchewan, in these parts of the country. Model trust deed ownership protects your local trustees legally if the terms of the model trust deed are properly upheld. What does that mean? Well, it comes to that question of liability. If you are holding the property under the model trust deed, you're following the directions of the manual, the trustee handbook in the region in your deployment and disposition of assets for the benefit of your community of faith, you are protected. And it's really important here in Alberta for people to be aware of that, because most trusteeships under the Trustee Act of the province of Alberta and the Societies Act changed about 3 or 4 years ago, and there was an enormous shift in liability for voluntary trustees in many different organizations outside the United Church. That is not the case for us. If you're operating under the model trust deed, you're holding your assets in accord with the policy of the United Church of Canada, you're doing things the right way they're supposed to be done, you're protected, you're good. You don't have to be worrying, okay? So it's really important to hear that, because I actually have inquiries from people who are trustees who are very worried that they will face personal liability in serving in that role. That is not the case under the model trust deed. And that's very good news for us in our local communities of faith. However, now we come to the part about trustees and land titles. This is really, really the simplest way that we can explain this to you, which is do not try this at home. If you've got any issues in terms of changing ownership of your assets, anything happening with your property, if there's any motion whatsoever, change, whatever that goes to registration and land titles, don't try it. Don't go to a lawyer because the lawyer won't know what to do. What you can do is call your regional minister in Pacific Mountain region, or you can contact Sue or myself here in Chinook Winds region. Trina Duncan also is very much familiar with Alberta land titles. We can do the work that's needed to make sure your trustee registrations are up to date. It's a cumbersome process, but it's a process that we can do, and we don't charge. So it's really important that if you have any issues with your trusteeship and your land title, the best thing to do is to contact your region. And here's where I can tell you folks in Pacific Mountain region that you have a much easier time than we do here in Alberta, where we have a Ministry of Red Tape Reduction, don't you know? Here in Alberta, the trustees have to be recorded on title. The names of trustees have to be recorded on the title as owners of the property for the benefit of the congregation. If one of those names changes, guess what? The title has to be revised and re-registered. And so I spend probably a day to 2 days every month dealing with land titles issues here in Chinook Winds region. In BC, bless you, first of all, a lot of your land titles and registration process is online and electronic, and therefore DocuSign is possible. Here in Alberta, we're still using hard copy ink, and I think they still use Gestetners, if anybody remembers what a Gestetner is. In BC, it's online, and in most cases, titles can be held under the trustees of St. John's by the gas station, the trustees of Sicamous United Church. The trustees do not have to be personally named on the title in British Columbia. So that makes it much easier to maintain your registration because you're keeping your trustee list update for insurance and governance purposes within your community of faith, but you never have to be dealing with land titles in the way that we do here in Alberta. And under the Ministry of Red Tape Reduction here in Alberta, they've now made it so that you actually have to get an affidavit of execution when you update your trustees for the title, because that makes it easier. Do I hear the group laughing? Hear what I did there? That was a joke. So basically, trustees and land titles, call the region. We'll help you out. Don't call a lawyer. You don't need a lawyer because we're able to manage this under the rubric of the United Church of Canada Act. And so if there's anything you take from this seminar today, it is in terms of land titles and trusteeship. Do not try this at home. Call the region. We're happy to help you. Okay? Next. Oh, this is fun. Well, actually, hang on here. Let's take before we get into the whole rental, lease, and revenue conversation, which is the next piece, let's take a look and see if we've got any interesting questions.
There's one right under my listing the directors and officers liability insurance.
Right. Is the United Church of Canada Act federal legislation? Absolutely it is. It was passed by the federal government in 1924 and was updated in 2018 when regions took over from conferences and presbyteries. It is a tough thing to teach other organizations, e.g. credit unions. Yes, it is. And that's why, again, anything to do with registration of property or financing or whatever, please call the region. We're happy to help you out, because these organizations can get into so deep into the weeds that it's extremely hard to untangle the matter. Yes, the model trust deed. I actually can show you a fun copy of the model trust deed here right now. It's in the trustee handbook. It's also online. Here's your model trust deed. I don't know why it's called, well, column 1 is over here. I don't know why they got it this way. Maybe there's something about how the lawyers worked at that time. It seems backwards to me. Don't you think that column 1 should be here and 2 should be there? But anyway, this is the model trust deed as it is written. It is actually a federal piece of legal instrument, federal legal instrument, let's call it that. And if you want to read it, you're welcome to do so. It's available online. It's available in your trustee handbook, and it's incorporated free of charge as a bonus at the end of every copy of the manual. So that's your model trust deed, and that in fact is how your properties are held under the United Church of Canada. Just going to return to the questions here if I can.
Joel, do you have an approvals working group in Alberta?
We have the property working group.
So
Same kind of thing.
Same
Yeah.
kind of thing. What's the
Yeah.
relationship with all of the property and pieces that go along with that? Nancy, if I'm wrong, please tell me. What's the relationship between the properties working group and our approvals working group, and how that all works?
I think it's almost kind of the same sort of on a good day, but Trina knows more about this stuff than I do.
Okay.
So, but we look after anything to do with property, finance, and we recommend to the region for Trina's review and signature. Yeah.
Similar here.
Let's see. Yes, in terms of the comment here from Sycamoose around the minutes from a meeting at which a trustee is appointed. Yes, those, you need to keep your minutes, even though it's not going to be registered on title or whatever. You still need to have your records from because ultimately that's where a lot of the legal issues and insurance issues will reside. So yes, absolutely. I'm not sure I understand the other question here. Electing means everybody knows who are the trustees of the community of faith, not forgotten. At some point, we'll return to that question, and perhaps we can clarify a bit further before I attempt to venture an answer. I'd like to get back to the fun topic of leases, insurance, and other such things. Just a minute here. Okay, here we are. Rentals, leases, revenue, and taxation. For those of you in Chinook Winds region, this is the new improved version of this particular section of the seminar. I'm hoping we can do this well. A lot of communities of faith are increasingly renting facilities out as a key revenue stream. It has to do with a whole bunch of factors around economics, costs of operation, the charitable landscape in Canada. Everyone says, well, it's because we don't have as many donors as we used to. That's part of it. But it's also how people contribute is different, and but our facilities costs tend to remain consistent. So there's a lot of rentals out there. Here's some things, here's a pro tip that we've learned the hard way. Rentals are about more than just money. Values alignment matters. And as trustees and as governing bodies in communities of faith and as ministry leaders in communities of faith, we have full authority and discretion to not rent to certain groups. Particularly if your congregation is an affirming ministry in the United Church of Canada, it is really important to check with or to check out who is renting. Because if you have values misalignment in your congregation, it starts to really disrupt the ministry and really can damage the relationship to the wider community. So random rentals are not a thing. We really want to see some level of alignment between who is using our space and our own values as United Church Communities of Faith. So that's for the what we would call episodic rentals, the short-term rentals where you've got groups that are coming in to meet and they're just using the space for a short period of time. I have a lot of challenges in terms of my work dealing with congregations and leasing agreements. Many of our communities of faith have leased space to daycares, to dance schools, to various different groups, and that's all fine and dandy, provided you have the right policy structure and the right, values alignment as noted above. But most congregations, I'm going to be really honest with you, don't do leases very well. And it's because oftentimes we don't understand the value of our actual property as it enters into a leasing conversation. And so we will tend to lease for a discounted rate. We will tend to negotiate what's called a gross lease amount because it's simpler to manage and administer. And what ends up happening is that we end up losing our shirts over time because we may get money coming in to pay for the use of the space, but what happens as utilities costs, insurance costs, maintenance costs climb over time, it is extremely difficult to renegotiate the lease if those have been already included in a gross amount. So I strongly recommend that when you're thinking of a long-term lease, that you talk to the region first. In Chinook Winds region, you talk to Sue, Barry, or myself before you sign any lease and structure any lease. We do have lease agreements that are standardized, available to us, and we have some hard-won expertise in the methodology of calculating lease cost versus operating cost as part of any rental agreement. And it's really important that we work with that so that over time, the costs of operation for the lease space keep pace with the realities of our utilities and other costs in our day-to-day life. So again, we're recommending region advice and authorization. And in fact, since 2019, according to the Manual of the United Church of Canada, any lease that goes over a certain period of time, typically about 3 or 4 months, is considered a long-term lease, and the region needs to advise and see those leases. And that's required because we want to make sure that we're actually not putting ourselves at undue risk or liability or risk of loss in these leases. So the best way to handle, if you're going to rent your space or lease your space to another group, the best way to deal with such arrangements is to contact the region first and talk to us, and we'll happily help you. It's much easier to work on these things ahead of when the lease is agreed than coming in to find that you've got to deal with a 10-year lease where the property tax component for the lessee has not been properly contemplated. Yes, it's happened, and yes, the community of faith in question is forced to fork out $23,000 a year in property tax because they didn't cover that off properly in their lease agreement. I can tell you all sorts of stories. I'm here all week. There's another one for you. Revenue and taxation aspects. It's really important to pay attention to related versus unrelated usages of our property. So, and here's where we have to refer you to CRA advisory documentation. In some cases, a lawyer may be important to work with on this, but depending on how much revenue you're getting from a lease or a rental, it can have an impact on your status with the Canada Revenue Agency. And we need to be able to structure the lease properly. We need to be able to report lease income properly. And we need to be able to manage these factors from the point of view of potential taxability in a way that is that avoids us getting into trouble with Canada Revenue Agency. There are also some alternative approaches to leasing that can allow us to be able to make the space available to the community groups, garner revenue to offset our operating costs, and remain in compliance as charities under Canada Revenue Act legislation. The reason I'm bringing this up is CRA is being much more assertive about charities and reporting and revenue and different requirements than they used to be. It's not an insoluble problem, and it's not the big boogeyman around the corner that's going to eat you, but we need to be careful, because the fundamental issue is we are allowed to make use of space that is surplus to our church usages, and it is therefore considered a related enterprise up to a certain amount of income, typically within range of our operating costs. If we start to make money off our rentals and leases, and we say we're going to lease the building so that we can pay for our staffing, that is not an operating cost, and Canada Revenue Agency is going to start taking a look. It can take a while, but it also takes an awfully long time to untangle once you get into difficulty with CRA around related versus unrelated usages. This is a hugely technical topic. I'm giving you essentially a cartoon version of kind of the issues that we face. And so there is much more detail that can be offered. I have referrals that can offer guidance and advice out of my office. I've also got most of the CRA legislation and guidebooks on the matter. Sue Broderick, I know, is also aware of a number of these things. We have some communities also where property tax issues come into play, depending on how much space is actually used for your lease purposes. So again, this is another reason why keeping in touch with the region, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means we need to be careful in terms of how we manage our stewardship of our property and under these rental and leasing arrangements. Okay. Okay, there we go. Here's where we get some interesting conversation going. If any of you are trustees of other charitable or nonprofit organizations, the general rule is that the trustees are not allowed to put any assets of the nonprofit or the charity at any form of risk. That is not true under the Model Trust Deed and the United Church of Canada Act. The standard of the United Church of Canada is that trustees must invest and manage property. You're allowed to do it in a way that garners a return. You can put assets at a prudent degree of risk. If it is, the basic rule is the prudent investor rule, which is if you would do it for yourself at home and you can prove with paperwork that the investment or the risk that you're taking for your community of faith is the same that you would do at home, you're good. So the standard is prudence and faithfulness as fiduciary trustees for the United Church of Canada in your local context. What actually that means is that many of our communities of faith are kind of on the other side. It's not that they're taking undue risks or throwing the money away or wasting it on ventures that, you know, swampland in Arizona or whatever. It's that in many of our communities of faith, we are so risk averse that we're actually not meeting the prudent investor rule. We're not meeting that standard of prudence and wise stewardship of the assets so that we have the ongoing benefit accruing to the community of faith and to the United Church of Canada. So trustees are actually kind of in an enterprise position, and they have a fiduciary responsibility to their community of faith to manage the assets in a way that actually treats them with respect and can garner a suitable return where appropriate. Again, advice and guidance is really, really significant. Your congregational accountant and your region accountant, your property working group or approvals working group or regional minister can offer guidance, but it's really important to recognize that as trustees, if we simply say, well, we're just going to put all the assets into long-term savings accounts because there's no risk, from a biblical perspective, that falls to the parable of the talents. We are actually authorized to be prudent and wise stewards in our fiduciary responsibility to our communities of faith. And when I work with communities of faith on an individual basis, when I review their assets, I'm often concerned to see that we're simply not managing the assets in a way that's garnering any kind of proper economic return that can actually benefit our community of faith. In other words, we're leaving value on the table. And so as trustees, we are prudent investors on behalf of the community of faith. Finally, property transactions and recommended policy on following that. The trustee handbook, the manual, and your friendly region representatives mandate early consultation with the region before you start making plans. Certainly before you start setting agreements, and well before you start setting up transactions for your church property. The region needs to know, because ultimately the region has to approve on behalf of the United Church of Canada whatever is happening with your land and buildings. And our own experience in various different contexts can help us to guide you as trustees and other governing leaders in the local community of faith to do it, to work in a way that's going to meet your best interests. So depending on which region, whether it's Pacific Mountain or Chinook Winds region, typically what happens in our side in Chinook Winds, the property working group will hear that there's a transaction in place. We will have an initial consultation with the, or not in place, in view in a local community of faith. We'll have an initial consultation with folks in the community of faith. We'll hear perhaps from any proponent who wishes to do some real estate transaction on the site. We'll offer some early guidance early on at the stage of the initial permission to transact the property. And it's really important that trustees recognize that the process to move property in the United Church of Canada isn't simply call Joel and say one of two things. Joel, we're done with our building. What do you want to do with the keys? Yes, that's happened. Or, yes, Joel, we've sold the building and here's what we want to do with the property. Both of those are far too late, and it's not what's mandated. When you want to move or deal with property in the United Church of Canada, the first instance is to get consultation and consent from the region for any sale, amalgamation, encumbrance, placement of debt, long-term lease, major renovation, anything. Contact the region. Let's get that initial approval in place and review, and then you're covered. Then you're good to move forward and have a discussion, and then you bring back the proposal before signing the agreements. Before signing the agreements. Let me repeat, before signing any agreements. Because if you sign the agreements and you have not got region approval, you're not following the model trust deed, you're not following the manual guidelines, and I'd ask the group to do a show of hands, but we won't do it that way. Are you covered then for any liability? The answer is no. So basically, again, the two key themes that come out of this quick setup guide for being a trustee for your community of faith are as follows. Anything to do with your land title, registration, etc., requires living trustees and requires a conversation with your region to make sure that the paperwork is started in the right way and that we're going down the right pathway. Secondly, any sale, amalgamation, encumbrance, any property transaction of any scope whatsoever, talk to the region first. Because it's not like we're trying to be authoritative or controlling. What we are trying to do is help you avoid that question of direct liability and bring you back under the coverage of the Model Trust Deed and the United Church of Canada Act. So that's it. That's our show. It's been a nice evening. See you all later. No, let's look at questions, and we can have some further general questions as appropriate. I don't know, Shauna, how you want to monitor the questions from this point. We can look in the chat first, and then if there's other questions, people can raise hands.
There's a couple in the chat right now.
Okay.
Starting with Lynn Valley. How do we distinguish between, I'm guessing, lease and rental? I'm not sure, Lynn Valley, you may need to
yeah,
give a little bit
I think
more.
that's what they meant, lease and rental. So a lease is going to be something that involves a sizable amount of space in your facility over a long period of time, typically longer than 4 months. So if you have, for example, a community day camp that's using your facility for the summer months, that's a rental. Okay, they're going to be in there for 2-3 months. They might use the basement. You might want to talk to us at the region to make sure there's no tricks that need to be addressed around that relationship. But if instead of a day camp, you have a day care that has decided to lease the space to to rent out the entire basement of your building, friends, that's a lease. There's all sorts of issues that have to be managed around that. They're all solvable, but talk to the region before you sign the deals. Okay? Can you remind us of what fiduciary duty and responsibility mean? I love throwing those technical terms in because it makes me sound really smart. It just means, fiduciary means, are you in a trust relationship with your community of faith? So you're occupying a position of trust and responsibility on behalf of your community of faith. So that's what being fiduciary is all about. And there's a Latin root to it, and it's super exciting. So hopefully that helps. Thank you for the shout out there that it was helpful. When trustees meet, are they allowed to meet virtually? Yes. So how this tends to work is you need to be able to meet in a way that allows people to see and hear each other in real time. Okay. Email voting is really, I wouldn't do it in anything that the trustees are going to have to do because you need to have a paper trail that says the motion was duly considered by a group of people either on a screen or in a room all at the same time. So, you know, I've seen trustees pass motions through email chain. Good luck with that if it goes sideways, because it's extremely difficult to prove it out. Sue Broderick has a comment.
Just one other comment. The trustees handbook does elaborate that a trustees meeting has to be duly called with 7 days notice.
Yes. Yeah, for special
you,
meetings, yes.
Yes, because you would normally have your trustee, but 7 days notice is minimum. So you can't sort of call a trustees meeting for something that you want to happen tomorrow because you didn't reach out to the region to get permission or to follow due process. because that's not really a duly constituted meeting for trustees. That's the one thing in the handbook that it specifically says 7 days notice.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. And that's really important. And it is often something when we're dealing with property transactions, we have to be really careful working with the realtor, whether it be our realtor or the purchaser's realtor, because conditions have to be set so as to allow that due notice for the trustees and to allow the region to review and approve and get that approval back to you. So we typically can't conclude property transactions on anything less than 30 days terms. Sometimes I typically recommend 60 days. And then we can often beat 60 days. But setting conditions for anything shorter than 30 days is setting yourselves up for liability. And I'm absolutely serious. We've gotten into real tangles with that. Question here, what if the whole church is leased? What is the role of trustees in this? I think that's a call your region, because I think I need to hear more about this. And so we might need to have a little chat there around what that actually kind of looks like, because it sounds like it's more complicated than maybe meets the eye. Is there a list of Pacific Mountain Region contacts for the different things discussed today, like investments, leases, and so forth? You know what, Shauna, I'm going to defer to you on that one because I'm not necessarily a Pacific Mountain kind of dude. Comments?
I think the best thing you can do is connect with who your regional minister is for pastoral relations and community of faith support. So myself, Kathy Davies, Maggie Enright, and Mark Colombe are the people that you could connect with about that, and we would connect you with the right person.
Yeah, I think that's the model that you guys tend to have, is that the regional ministers are the front end on most of this stuff.
Yeah.
There's lots of great investment advice available. Also, the United Church of Canada Foundation is actually an asset to us as trustees. I actually find the foundation offers some really good guidance in terms of, so that's another one you can look for. But if you're going to talk to the United Church of Canada Foundation, probably really good to keep in touch with the region too, so that we don't end up stepping on each other's toes.
So just recognizing it's 10 after 4, and I want to thank everybody for your attendance today, but I don't know, Joel and Sue, can you do another 5 or 10 minutes?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm available for another
Okay.
5 or so. Anyway,
And
I don't know
if there's anybody that can't write out their question and you want to put your hand up, please do. We'll see what we can handle. Just keep it, if we can keep it moving, that would be lovely.
process for reinvesting trustee managed accounts. So I'm going to refer you to the trustee handbook for that kind of a detail, question. But typically, trustee managed accounts and investments have to be reported back to the congregation as part of its annual financial reporting anyway. So the kinds of standards that you would have in terms of any congregational assets need to apply to the trustees as well. But there are particular mandates there in the handbook for the trustees at that level of detail that are probably important to read. I would refer you to the section, but I can't kind of look at that and try and answer questions at the same time. So what we can do is follow that one up, and if there's a need to get specific references, I can share that with Shauna. Oh, thank you, Kathy. That's a really good point. Ha, ha, ha. I knew I missed it. Yes. Who's the boss is Kathy Davies' question, basically. And the answer is the governing body of the congregation, and the congregation itself gives direction to the trustees, not vice versa. And I've had lots of places where the trustees end up giving direction back to the congregation because they somehow think it's their responsibility as stewards of the assets. That is not how the United Church of Canada is set up. The congregation nominates the trustees to hold the assets, but the governing body of the congregation, the board or council, sets the policy direction and says, this is what we want to do. And if they say to the trustees, you need to do X or Y, that's the congregation's direction. The trustees' fiduciary responsibility is to execute it with the best guidance and advice and support that they can get. So thank you for raising that question, Kathy. It was in my notes and I knew I'd skipped over something. At a congregation that I have been in discussion with, they are looking at it reinvesting with company Edward Jones. They will require names. Yeah, so investments, you're typically going to have to get your trustees' individual signatures on. Land holdings in British Columbia, not necessarily, but for investments, the trustees have to get duly approved, and be in compliance with the United Church of Canada Act, and then the trustees can sign out of their fiduciary role. If a church has a one-year lease in place, Joel said there could be a liability issue. No, but you want to look at the lease. Not necessarily. It doesn't mean that you can't lease your space out for a year. That's could be just fine. But we need to make sure the lease is properly worded so that liability is properly covered off. Does that clarify for that question, Terry? I'll look for something in the chat.
And Joel, I think it's important on a lease, depending who you're leasing to, but anything that's classified as a long-term rental or a lease, you want to make sure who you're renting to carries liability insurance.
Yes, thank you for that, Sue. See, that's exactly right. That's another thing that was in my notes that I skipped over. Make sure that the people that you're leasing to actually carry their own insurance policies, because when the slip and fall happens, the lawyers are coming after all of us. How it is. Okay, is there anybody got any hands up, Shauna, that I can't see?
I've just looked and I can't see anybody.
Joel, I might just add a couple of things.
For sure, Barry, please.
Yeah, getting back to insurance, just a couple of notes that might be helpful to some trustees. We had insurance through another organization many years ago and moved to the UCC Protect program, and we found it very useful. It's been revamped about 3 years ago, and it's now working really quite well. So I really recommend the UCC Protect program. Their premiums are now down to being kind of reasonable, and they have as their agent Hub Insurance. Hub had some initial problems, but they have now put enough staff on the UCC file to handle things properly. So I do recommend it. And if you want more information through that, you can get through the website UCC at hubinternational.com. The other thing, a couple of things I wanted to mention, many years, well, 15 years ago, I guess, we as a group of trustees at our church were wondering whether we really knew what amount of money was going to be required over the next 10 years or so for replacement of major items like HVACs and furnaces and that sort of thing. We didn't really know what that figure might be. So we contacted an engineering firm who did for us a baseline building condition assessment. And in that, we said, tell us what our building is going to require for major kinds of repairs and maintenance over the next 10 years. And so they've laid out a schedule for things that we can expect. And they gave us some dollar values, which I'm finding are on the low side as we have to replace some of these things. However, it's something that we need to do as trustees, part of our fiduciary duties. The other thing that's just come out in the last several months is that when the United Church was negotiating a new policy arrangement through Hub. They also found that a lot of churches didn't really know what the replacement values were for their church. And so they've made arrangements with a company for Western Canada. It's Loss Control Consultants Limited. And this was optional, but at our church, we did go through this process to find this appraiser, Scott Cruikshank, who did the appraisal for us and has given us a value of our property for replacement value so that we know that our insurance is adequate. And so I think it's something that we need to be have something on paper as trustees that show that we've done our homework and have the insurance properly covered off. So I'm pretty sure that loss control consultants firm also operates out in BC. They were making arrangements to call on churches in a region and do a batch for a reduced rate.
Thanks, Barry, for that. Actually, 2 points come out of that. First of all, I note in the chat people are concerned about premiums, et cetera, et cetera. I appreciate your comments. Unfortunately, I don't control those. So it's another discussion for another day. In terms of valuation of your property, one of the things we have discovered to our chagrin is that property valuations for many of our communities of faith are quite out of date compared to the market here in Alberta. And so it'd be really, really important to make sure that that valuation in terms of insurance coverage is current. Because if you do have a problem and your coverage is inadequate, it can cause real difficulty in terms of repair or even replacement of assets. The other thing I'm just putting into the chat here, I've learned today that we have a dedicated claims officer at UCC Protect and Hub. Her name is Adelaide Marquardt. She's actually really, really good. I had an emergency situation that I was dealing with, sent an email. She got back to me. We've got the problem solved inside a business day. So we have a dedicated claims advisor. And so a pro tip on these kinds of situations as trustees, if you have an insurance claim for your property, I would reach out to Adelaide Marquardt almost before you do anything else, and then talk to your region. Get the fire put out or turn the water off or whatever it is, but be in touch with Adelaide, because if we go through brokers or other routes, it can add actually further steps into the process. And because our insurance company or our insurance relationship is what's called a captive or an exclusive structure, and therefore it needs to be managed just like everything else United Church in its own unique kind of way. So just to be clear, we do have our own dedicated representative if a claim is necessary. And Barry, to your point, the issue around valuations is really, really significant. It would be important to make sure your valuations are up to date. Appreciate the positive response, folks, and for your interest today and the large attendance. Kind of feels like we might have to run this trustee workshop at least every couple of years to catch up on things with folks. I am sure there are questions that will be triggered. So what we plan to do is circulate the slideshow as well as the AI generated summary of the meeting. That will get circulated once Marina gets that sorted out at the PMR office. So you'll get a summary, you'll get the slide deck, and then contact information for you folks in Pacific Mountain would primarily begin with your regional minister. Here in Chinook Winds region, your contact for questions, which I may or may not be able to answer, but if I can't answer them, I'm going to talk to Sue because she knows everything. And if she doesn't, then Barry knows the rest of it. So in the chat is my email contact for United Church activities here in Chinook Winds region. And I'm happy to respond as best I can.
I
So
think
once
the other
again,
thing,
yeah,
the other
Sue.
quick thing to note is, Shauna said this has been recorded because of the issue that only 100 people were able to come online. When she started to say we would be about 140 people. If you have somebody that from your trustees that said, well, I tried to get online, let them know that the slides, the presentation, and the notes will be available. But yeah, there was some glitch as to as soon as we got 100 people, it quit and nobody else could come online.
We'll do our best to send it out to everybody who's registered, and then that
Yes.
way we
Yep.
can do that. And Joel, I appreciate your every year or two. I'm wondering if we can do it sooner, but we'll touch base about that. I also wanted to send greetings to everybody from Trina. She had another meeting that she needed to go to, and because of our glitch with who could enter, she wasn't able to get in at the time. So she said to make sure that I sent greetings from her, and I appreciate everybody's interest and availability to be here today. That just proves all the commitment that you all have to your congregations and the way that you want to get them run, and make sure that we're doing it in a way that is United Church approved. So thank you everybody for being here. I don't want to close it out. I want Joel to have the last word. So
Yeah, thanks everyone for taking the time here. Many blessings and thanks for your fiduciary gifts in your communities of faith on behalf of the Ministry of the Gospel and the Ministry of the United Church of Canada, where you live. It's actually a more fun task to be a trustee than it looks like at first. And we're always